If you follow the calendar, now July the 4th for America marks the significant milestone, and it's the natural celebration for the independence. Even this year, when we got on social media, former US President Barack Obama tweeted something that actually drew the attention worldwide, and this is what he wrote, and I quote, "The 4th of July, it's about celebrating the big, bold, inclusive experiment that our American democracy, and has always been an experiment. Our democracy has never been guaranteed, which means we can't take it for granted. We need to keep fighting for it, keep improving it, and keep making sure it reflects the better angles of our nature instead of the worst." And end quote. It's so much easier today that when we talk about the word democracy, again, it's not just the words on the paper, it's not just the concept based on the research, it's actually the reality that we're facing today. But when we follow this geopolitical change, many countries today are standing at the crossroads when we talk about democracy and when we talk about this social economic agenda. For example, take a look at the nation of Kenya. What is happening today in the nation of Kenya? It's rather confusing. It's not just about this political uncertainty. It's not just about this economic inequality. It's really the voices that we must hear. And the younger generations today, they're also asking for democracy in the nation of Kenya today. But how should we understand the complexity? And what does that mean when we say the word democracy by looking at the chaos in the nation of Kenya today? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our two distinguished speakers. And the first one is Professor Nina Berman. Professor Berman is a professor in the School of International Letters and the Cultures at Arizona State University, with previous appointment at the University of Texas at Austin and the Ohio State University. Her research and teaching focus centrally on questions of exclusion and inclusion across time and space. And our second speaker is Mr. Omari Gatto. Mr. Gatto was born in Uganda on the coast south of Mombasa. He completed the secondary school in Mombasa and has been working in the tourism industry for more than 30 years, including working as a tour driver. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and let's welcome Professor Berman and Mr. Gatto. Welcome to both of you to our show.
Thank you so much, Will.
Well, Professor Berman, I want to get started with you first. Initially, when I discovered you, because this amazing article that you wrote, which is entitled "The Deep Roots of Kenya's Unrest." A tax bill sparked deadly protest, but a broken financial system has plagued the country for years. Professor Berman, help us with this fundamental understanding. What is happening today in the nation of Kenya, and why do we need to understand this broken financial system? Your thoughts?
Yeah, first, again, thank you for inviting us. I was actually pleased to hear you put the Kenyan situation in a global context, because we see protests in many countries across the planet, and we see governments falling and changing from right to left and from left to right. So sometimes it's not, if you're looking at England and at France, and so people are overall not happy with what is going on. And at the core of all of this is the economic inequality, the growing gap between rich and poor, as well as the lack of true participatory democracy. So we are seeing that the grievances of peoples are not heard, and that the system is more and more set up in a way that disadvantages the majority of populations really across the planet. And so that is also what's going on in Kenya. And Kenya is a country that has a very young population. So we're at 56 million people in Kenya, and 80% of them are under 35. And by 2050, we are actually supposed to see more than 90 million Kenyans. So this is actually a situation that will only escalate in the years to come if we don't come up with solutions. And the economic inequality has been rising, especially since COVID. The cost of living has escalated and wages have not kept up. So for young people in particular, they didn't have a chance to enter the job market, the labor market. Many of them are either unemployed or underemployed. We have some figures of up to 67% of youth being unemployed. And maybe that some of them have some small jobs, but overall, they're not employed properly. Sometimes they're educated, they're well educated, and they can't enter the economy. So they don't have really a place in this society. And that means also that they can't start families and all kinds of things. So the financial system is related to that because there are very few opportunities for young people to start their own business. And what I focused on in the article that you referenced is the system of microcredits. And microcredits were hailed at some point as really bringing opportunity to poor communities. But what we are seeing is that we have lenders who are actually under investigation, in fact, and the companies are owned by Europeans. And the loans have such terms that they almost set people up for failure, for potential failure. So the interest rates per month are 4 to 6.5%, meaning that the motorbike or the vehicle that people buy will be double. I mean, the actual cost of the loan will be double the value of the motorbike or the car. So that is part of what I looked at in terms of how this affects young people who actually try to start a business in this economy, but then the terms or the way the financial system is set up is really pitched against them.
Mr. Gaito, I want to shift the next question to you. Again, you have been Professor Berman's research assistant for the past 14 years. And again, based on your bio, that you actually working in the tourism industry for more than 30 years. Let's go back to this text bill. Specifically for the younger generations, why is it so controversial? And from your perspective, what is it for the younger generations that they are really eager to change, or something that really motivate them to get on the street, to have the protest, to have the riot? What are they specifically looking for when we talk about this controversial tax bill? Your thoughts?
Thank you for having me here. What I can say, the situation now is Kenya, a situation which doesn't start today or yesterday, has been building up over the years. This is brought by the nature, I guess, of our Kenyan politics. Our Kenyan politics is based on so many things. For example, ethnicity. It's like you are electing someone because he's from your area or your clan or your tribe or sort things. During these elections or prior to the elections, these politicians or these people who want to be elected promise their electorate heavens and earth, big things. They instill hope and a lot of promises to these people, especially the young people. And then they buy it completely. But once these elections are over, their expectations are not met. What they met is something the opposite. The people who they vote in, once they are in these offices, they change their lifestyle. They start becoming far, far away from the people they elected them. They start living large, lavish lives. And these people who elect them, in most cases, when they approach them for their problems, which of course they elected this representative, these guys are always not there. Most of the time, they approach in their offices, you get the secretary there, they'll say, leave the message here. And then nothing goes beyond that. And then after another 5 years, they come back with different lies. They want to be re-elected. So it has been like that for over the years until this year. I think it's got worse because the current government promised the young generations or the people of Kenya in general a lot of things. And then while promising all these things, they were castigating the previous government. Like, if we come in, we'll do it much more better. For example, I remember the current president, when he was campaigning, he was saying, when you vote me in, I'll be sensitive to the people because this government is hiking tax every night and day. They don't care about the local person or the electorate. But 2 years into office now, he has hiked more taxes than his predecessor. And Kenya, most youth, 80% are below 35 years. And because of the job scarce, employment scarce, or unemployment all these things. So the majority of the youth, they resort to content creation and internet, at least because they can't get the formal jobs where they went to school for. So what made these people mad this time around? That's why I think the protest also, the Gen Zs decided, because now the government wanted to tax even these guys, their money they earn from this content they create. So they're wondering, like, I bought myself a camera, maybe a laptop. The government didn't help me in anything there. And then I create content and then I get money, they want to tax it. So I think, in my opinion, that's what made the young ones like erupt. And they also say, we can see the cost of living is going up every single day. Even now, our parents are struggling. So if they feel sorry for their parents because they are struggling to maybe educate them or things like that. So that's why this time around, the young ones, they decided, okay, we have to be hard and things has to be changed. Things has to change, so that's, I think, what I can say for now.
Thank you, Mr. Gaito. I want to shift our next question to Professor Berman. I want to go back to the article. Again, during the article, let's talk about the financial turmoil. This is what you wrote, and I quote, "And while Kenya boasts a more robust financial sector than most of its neighbors, bank loans remain off limits for much of the population. Only an estimate half of all adults have a bank account. 6% have credit cards, 22% have debit cards, and a mere 11% are able to afford a mortgage." I mean, financially speaking, Professor Berman, you are the expert. When I was reading the numbers for the first time, and as I was just read it for the second time or the third time, correct me if I'm wrong, those numbers, they don't sound very promising. I mean, again, as someone that, I'm not an economist, but this is quite anxious or worrying at this moment. So help us with better understanding, what are the significance behind those numbers, especially we are saying that 22% have debit cards, 11% merely can afford a mortgage. What is the government trying to offer? I mean, again, what is the solution they're trying to provide? Because people cannot live in this unstable economic situation. What do you say to that?
Well, actually, people can survive in many ways, right? I mean, those indicators that you mentioned here are all indicators related to what we call the formal sector of the economy. There's also the informal sector of the economy, which is, in terms of people participating in it, usually larger in the global south than the formal sector. So what is going on is, because of pressures from the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, there's this pressure to formalize the system by imposing more and more taxes. And these taxes take the leverage away that people have through their labor in the informal sector. So the idea was originally like, okay, we have to formalize the economy to give people benefits and more stability, et cetera, et cetera. But the way this is being done now, it doesn't bring more stability. So more formalization does not bring more stability to people. It doesn't bring them any health benefits or social security benefits and so forth. It just, if you, for example, what this tax bill was supposed to do is raise taxes, for example, on, at some point, cooking oil, but then they rolled that back. But I mean, some bread, cooking oil and bread. This is like, if you have people who are really impoverished and struggling, you cannot increase the taxes on these kind of staple food items, right? That is, then you're really starting to starve your population. So those were actually taken back earlier already, before the bill was passed. But there were many other provisions, including making access to healthcare more difficult by changing certain provisions in the healthcare sector and all kinds of things. So that is, the increasing the taxes without giving people an opportunity to actually have more revenue in a country that is struggling the way Kenya is, because especially since COVID and since the dollar has increased in value against the shilling. We can talk about that a little bit. So those are massive challenges for people. And one thing that Ruto promised, he said he was going to create funds that would help ordinary people to start businesses. What we have seen, and that is also in the article, is that this Hustler Fund has mostly passed out individual loans, personal loans that people use to just bridge and make ends meet, right? So not as investments. So they really have not become investments towards sustainable livelihoods, but they have become loans to just sort of pay the debts that people have, or just make ends meet for a while the actual loans that went towards starting new businesses, they have terms that are forbidding to most people. So, especially poor people. So they have helped a good number of people. The program in spirit is a good way to go because it has lower interest rates than, for example, the loans from Watu and Mogu that I mentioned in my article. But it's just not enough, and it doesn't reach enough people. And we have also, maybe we can, if you'd like to, we can talk a little bit more about how some of these pressures actually come from the outside. So if the dollar goes up, the national debt goes up. And then the national debt has gone up, is now a higher percentage of the GDP. And then the IMF and World Bank said, no, you got to do something. But it's connected to these currency politics, and it's connected to the high interest rates on the loans, right? So there are some pressures that come from the outside that make it really difficult for Kenya to navigate its economy, because it's not in control. Why does the price of milk go up in Kenya when the dollar goes up? Right? So that's how economies are entangled. And the way, Bretton Woods set up our global system, at the end of World War II, there is this, if I may quote Michael Manley, the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, he was interviewed in the documentary Life and Debt by Stephanie Black, and he said, if you want to see, who is in control, then look at who set up the system, right? And the current system, and this is what's not holding anymore worldwide. The current system was set up by the winners of World War II. And I mean, the World Bank is usually headed by somebody from the United States. The International Monetary Fund is headed by somebody from Europe. But we have many more voices on this planet right now. I mean, China, India, the BRICS countries. But, the representation, it's not representing anymore the reality on the planet. And it's not fair to many people on the planet.
Mr. Gaito, I want to continue our conversation. Let's talk about the reaction from the Kenyan president. Now, based on the latest report, it says, or it is believed, that Kenyan President William Ruto threatened to intensify the repression. So in other words, during the young protesters movement, President Ruto denounced the protests as treasonous and smeared its participants as criminals, and also believed that police force had the power to remove them, or however trying to come up with solutions to silence them. Now, as we had the discussion before, Mr. Gaito, from your perspective, what does that say about the Kenyan president when we look at this intensity situation between the government and the younger generation? And by saying, or by carrying out this, what we called intensifying measure, how does the international community understand the word democracy and understand the word fairness in the nation of Kenya today? I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, what I can say, democracy, I don't know here in Kenya how the leaders understand democracy. Because democracy is the will of the people. So here, basically, what I can say, according to your question, about what is going on now, you see, Kenya, we had a new constitution, which was promulgated in 2010. So this constitution has some, what we call, some chapters, which in our previous constitutions with the former president, they were not there, like the freedom of expression. Now is guaranteed in our current constitution. In the Article 37 of the Kenyan Constitution, the people are allowed for demonstrations, picketing, and petitions presentation to the authorities. So, I think what is now happening now, the government which is now in place, when we were voting on a referendum for this new constitution, they were on the north side. They didn't want it to pass, but the majority of Kenyans passed it. So now that they are leading the government, they have to lead by this constitution. But I don't know whether they read it or not, because they understand it differently to what the people understand it. So that's why we have this oppression from the police, because the people say it's our right, it is enshrined on the constitution, but the government says we as the government, we also have the obligation, or we have the right to make sure we provide the law and order, and then things works. So, for example, last year's demonstrations, maybe you can say it already, it was not that peaceful right from the beginning, because the police banned it, and the people do it against the police will. So there usually come out confrontation. But in this year's case, it was organized by those young minds and ladies called themselves Gen Zs. Everything was organized online. So there was no particular figure like to say, Mr. Gaito said, let us go to the street. It was not like that. It was, so the young men just saw how the government is running the government, how they run the constitution, and there was I think like the state capture. The executive controls the legislature and controls the judiciary. So the population was left with no one to, if they have any disagreements or problems, they can go to. And they resorted to the constitution, which gives them the right to do that. But because the government doesn't want to hear about it, that's what happens. So the people are demonstrating peacefully, but because it has been not legalized demonstrations, the police had tear gas canisters. And this is where all the problems start. But normally people go peacefully. So I think where people understand this democracy, that is where the problem is. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Gaito. For Professor Berman and Mr. Gaito, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking a last question to both of you. Again, based on the latest report, that the protests spread to estimated 25 of Kenya's 47 counties, and including President Ruto's own constituency. Again, this is something that cannot be ignored by the international community. Again, we're looking at the complication of the geopolitical change today. And of course, when we talk about this geopolitical change, economy tops the agenda. This is what matters the most, not just to Kenya, but it matters to the global citizens. But by looking at what's happening today, I want both of you to share with us, how do you think the international community at this moment should stand together or should stand behind the younger generations in Kenya? So in other words, if we continue allowed President Ruto to suppress the silence or to intensify the tension between the protesters and the police, it's not going to get better. But meanwhile, as an international member, we can't just stand alone. We can't just take a step back to watch what's going to happen. So from both of you, how do you think the international community should support and should come out and enable to bring something tangible and something useful on the table? Let's start with Professor Berman.
Yeah, thank you. I think there were even more counties, right? It was like 2/3 of the country's counties that were seeing protests, and yes, including in President Ruto's own home county. So the international community is in part responsible for some of the problems, and part of it is that economically, financially, the playing field is not level. So we should have, for example, fair royalties for in terms of the extractive industry. Kenya is very rich in terms of oil and gas and all kinds of minerals. We have a lot of companies that have descended on Kenya, but Kenya doesn't keep a high enough percentage of the royalties. Neighboring Tanzania has negotiated better contracts. So that is one area where Kenya could increase its revenue if it were to receive a better chunk of the royalties, better percentage of royalties from its own wealth. Another one, as I already mentioned it, the politics regarding the currencies, right? So if the damaging impact could be somehow minimized, or I don't know, detached. If the shilling was detached from the dollar, something like that, then we would have much more stability. Subsidized agriculture has been coming into Africa. This is something that has destroyed the economies of the Caribbean when the IMF and World Bank basically enforced, so sort of attached to the loans that they were giving to Jamaica, for example, that they had to allow more imports. And then the subsidized agricultural imports came into Jamaica, were cheaper than the local products, and killed the entire agricultural industry, or a lot of it. We're seeing similar things here. And we also see like there's an almost enforcement of using certain genetically modified seeds and pushing people away from small scale farming to industrialized farming, where in the United States, for example, we already are seeing the negative impact from all that industrial farming. So those are some of the things that are really concerning. Lower interest rate on debt, and perhaps don't deal or don't celebrate corrupt politicians. I mean, Ruto is a very controversial figure. I mean, he has so many scandals, has seen so many scandals since the beginning of his career, and has been involved in so many scandals, and with a lot of evidence, and including his accusation at the International Criminal Court. And then he receives the state dinner in Washington, also in the context of Kenya being somewhat forced to hire out its own police force. 1,000 police officers are now in Haiti. Kenya was given money for them, but that money, we don't know where it is. Very little of it went to the families of these police officers, or they were promised a certain amount of payment that they never received. So there are all kinds of things. It's all interconnected. And then, so in fact, the global community has a lot of different ways to make things easier for countries like Kenya. But it really affects how our global economy works, and who is making profits, and how high are the profits. And yeah, so global economic justice in Kenya is tied to economic justice globally.
Mr. Kaito, what do you say?
All this is happening because here we believe democracy came from West, and it's democracy that they value more than anything. But now, in my opinion, or maybe probably from most of other people's opinion here in Kenya, that these people, or the democracy, was brought here for the people's interests. That's why people don't aspire to get the leader they want. They're always imposed on a leader from somewhere. If it's not from the UK, maybe from the IMF or from the United States, someone who has his best interest in this country and maybe is thinking about doing investments in future. So they will always want to have someone in there who they listen to. This is where the problem is, because during the elections, for example, before the elections announced who the winner is, a lot of things happens there. And we do happen to have these political observers from Europe, Asia, the US, and they're all there. And whenever these problems are occurring, some are just open problems, which one can tell here some things, but they always stay quiet until the mess is done. And then they say, this is democracy, the people have spoken, and people have to move on. This is what we get. And then people move on, but they move on unhappy. And this is exactly what we are having now. So it has become worse because people are accepted, okay, if it's democracy, maybe we didn't want you, but because democracy says it's you, okay, we move on. But the thing is, what have you promised people? This and this, A, B, C, D. Second year, nothing. And then making life more difficult for people. People are basically losing hope. So all these things. So the international community can help in such things. They put their best interest aside and they make sure the really democracy is practiced so that people can get what they deserve. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Gaito. Thank you, Professor Berman. I mean, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such a fascinating conversation with our two distinguished guests. Number one, Professor Berman is a professor in the School of International Letters and Cultures at Arizona State University. And Mr. Gaito has been a Professor Berman's research assistant for the past 14 years. And I strongly connect everyone go online to connect with both speakers. I mean, again, as we mentioned before, what's happening in the nation of Kenya, it's not just a matter domestically, but it should be an alarming topic. It should be something that's for all international members to pay attention. And also, as what Mr. Gaito said, if we truly believe in the concept of democracy, if we truly believe that democracy works, that we need to understand the messages from the citizens and also the genuine ideas and also this compassion and love from the younger generations to the country. It's such an honor to have both of you, and thank you so much for doing this. And we love to have both of you on the show for our future episodes as we continue to pay attention to what's happening in the nation of Kenya today. Again, Professor Berman and Mr. Gaito, thank you so much for doing this.